So I know a little bit about crypto and blockchains, and I know much less about anything else. So hopefully what I talked to you about today will be insightful. I do want to say that at any point in time, feel free to ask questions in the chat box. I like interactive kind of discussions much more than just a pure lecture. Okay. So short intro, Jason did a great job. Let me just skip. Oh, one thing I'll say is that I'm organizing a small conference in Seoul in September, probably around the same time as Korea Blockchain Week. It's going to be called 100X. It's just on the convergence of blockchain, AI, and Unreal Engine. I believe Unreal Engine is going to be the dominant visual layer. Blockchain is going to be the information layer, and AI is going to be something around the creation layer. And so kind of I'm inviting a bunch of people from abroad. You guys are welcome to come, and if you're interested, just send me an email and I'll get you a ticket. So that's the agenda for today. I'm going to try to get through this in about 30 minutes. And after that, we can just talk, or I can tell you a lot more than what's on this agenda. So we're going to start off with what's a DAO. Then we're going to go into the history. I'm going to try to explain to you how DAOs have evolved, where they are today, and then what's kind of needed for DAOs today. I put that section number 4 in there so that in case you want to build something, this might be a helpful set of ideas on what to build. And then 5, we'll talk about later. So what is a DAO? So the most famous definition of a DAO that tends to be shared in the crypto community at large is that DAOs are a group with a shared bank account, right? So rather than having a single bank account at KB or Hana Bank, Hana Bank, does that exist? I don't know. Shinhan Bank, right? You end up having like 10 or 100 people that simultaneously control that bank account. I think a DAO is a lot more than that. And so the main idea is that DAOs are a type of blockchain leviathans. So what I mean with that is that for the longest time, where we were born determined what controlled us. So for example, if you were born in Korea, then the law that controls the things that you are allowed to do and not allowed to do is the Korean law. If you're born in France, then it's the French law that determines what you can and what you cannot do, right? And so this idea of sovereignty, or much more simply of like who has control over certain choices, is a question not so much of nation states anymore, or a function of where you were born, but it's now a function of code. Meaning, where you're born on the internet, so to speak, so where you belong, whether that be a layer 1, whether that be something like a DAO, it can determine what you can and cannot do in ways that are very, very hard to cheat or very hard to change, right? So this idea of sovereignty that is not just anymore with the nation state, but that is now with organizations themselves, is something that's pretty unique with organizations that are DAOs versus organizations that are just incorporated in Seoul, right? Incorporations incorporated in Seoul still fall fundamentally under the jurisdiction and under the sovereignty of the Korean government or the Korean nation state. When you incorporate a DAO on a blockchain, even if you're based in Seoul, it's not obvious that the organization falls under the rules and the sovereignty of the Korean nation state, right? And so the basic idea is that software isn't just eating the world, as we know since the internet, but software is reorganizing the world. And so the question is, how is software reorganizing the world? But hopefully this will play. So there's a little video from Steve Jobs. Just tell me it works. No, it's so good. Wait. All right, mistakes were made. So this doesn't work. Unfortunately, there's a short clip. I'll send you the link after. Steve Jobs is basically talking about how with the advent of the internet, we aren't constrained by our geographic location. So you can now have organizations that are simultaneously in Korea, in Paris, in New York, in Buenos Aires, and people can work at the same time. You can kind of create an organization within 15 minutes. I think he literally says that. And then you can also tear them down in literally 15 minutes. Now, that wasn't true even after the internet kind of came about in the 90s, right? Most of the organizations that evolved from before the internet and the organizations that evolved with the internet, such as the mangas, right? Like Google, Facebook, Instagram, all these kind of internet organizations are still all bound by where they're based. Even if there's such things as multinational organization, they still have a headquarter that still refers to a single country that has sovereignty over what that organization does. And the main way that that sovereignty is exercised is via taxes, right? So if I'm an organization that's based in Switzerland, but I do business in Korea, if I make a lot of money, typically the majority of taxes that I will pay or should pay should be in Switzerland, and they shouldn't be in Korea, right? And so Steve kind of like was thinking about kind of an early idea of DAOs, but not quite. And so I think an efficient way of thinking about DAOs is not to say, what are they? So you could say DAOs are a bunch of lines of code. DAOs are, transnational internet organization. DAOs are organizations that people think have something to do with blockchain. A better way of looking at DAOs is sort of what problems do they solve? And I think that there's sort of 4 problems that we can group DAOs into. So the first one on the top left is DAOs solve problems for traditional organizations. And so there's 2 subcomponents to that. The first one is inefficiencies in organizations as they scale. And the second one is a high cost of organizations. So let's go into that. The famous example for this, if you wanted to do some research into it, would be Shapeshift. So Shapeshift is an organization that has existed for a long time, that has entirely abandoned its legal structure as a traditional organization and has entirely moved to being an on-chain set of lines of code, so to speak, right? And so Shapeshift shifted because in a very famous post, Eric shared that the cost of trying to manage a transnational organization in crypto with a token was prohibitive, meaning he was paying millions of dollars every single year to lawyers to try to understand what he should do, because he wanted to do the right thing, but no one knew what he should do. And so that's a cost of the organization, right? If you spend millions of dollars that you pay to lawyers in the US, in Europe, in Asia, everywhere where you operate, you got to make that money back, right? And he said, that's absolutely ridiculous. At some point, he said he was just spending so much time on legal work that he wasn't even running the organization anymore. And the reason why he had created the organization was in order to deliver a product, right? He didn't create an organization to talk to lawyers and give a lot of money to lawyers. It's a side product, the legal challenges. And so the high cost of organizations, one example is Shapeshift, specifically the high cost of legal work that is required today if you do anything sort of with blockchains and tokens. And if you do it on a multinational, transnational scale. The inefficiencies in organizations as they scale, the most simple example is the number of people that you have to manage as an organization. So if you Walmart today and you employ over 1 million people, managing all these people, even just within the organization, is tremendously complicated, right? And again, the simplest reason I always give is the geographic diversity, which means you have different jurisdictions, you got to manage different labor laws, different social security laws, healthcare regimes. All these things kind of fall away if the only jurisdiction that you're on is a blockchain, right? Or where supposedly code is law, although we'll return to that sort of idea. So that's sort of the first problem. So if you just take a normal organization, and if it wants to scale globally, and if it wants to scale with low costs, then you could argue that DAOs are one solution to doing that in a way that is more efficient than with traditional organization. You'll notice that the argument that I make here is an economic argument, meaning you save money. In other words, when and why should you DAO? You should DAO when you want to scale, when you want to reduce costs, and therefore you reduce, because you want to save money, right? So this is a fundamentally an economic argument. If you go to the second kind of problem that can be solved by DAOs, which is problems on the internet, we're specifically referring to the theory that sort of Chris Dixon has made popular. And that's the idea that platforms such as Facebook and Twitter initially grow by, enabling API access to their data so that third parties can build on top of the platform. But the problem is that while the platform initially starts as being cooperative, it ends up being extractive over time, meaning it ends up closing certain API access, such as Twitter in 2016, in order to centralize access to its data, because that's the most valuable asset that many of these internet platforms have today. And so the shift of a platform from a cooperative model as it starts out to an extractive model as it grows, that can be solved by DAOs. And how can it be solved by DAOs? If you give DAOs governance power over key decisions such as, should we turn off the API or not, then a DAO can kind of control these very high-level decisions around whether a platform can switch from being cooperative to being extractive. And so the big innovation here is, what DAOs don't prevent the shift from a cooperative model to an extractive model. They just mean that anyone who is a participant of the DAO has a voice in the decision whether or not an API gets turned on or off. Versus right now, it's basically on Facebook, it's just Mark Zuckerberg and the board of directors, right? Presumably the shareholders a little bit, but it's a very small group. You don't have the users, they don't have any voice, and you don't have any third parties that don't have a voice as well, whether that be stakeholders like people who build on top of Facebook or even the regulators themselves. So first one was problems of traditional organizations. The second point is problems of kind of internet organizations like Facebook, right, and Twitter. A third thing that DAOs solve is around this idea of internet phenomena. And the three subsections: simping, shitposting, and memes. And so what I mean with that is that how do you build organizations around these three concepts? And so probably the easiest example, I should have put it first, is memes. So Dogecoin is the ultimate example, right? There is no particular use to Dogecoins. I mean, explicitly when Jackson started it, right, he was like, this is literally, the point is that there is no point, right? And so you can now kind of structure these communities, or you can organize people around these mere ideas, including ideas of there being no idea, almost like very Dadaist, right? Or something being of no use whatsoever, that itself can be the use. And I think that's actually a super interesting idea, because we can't do this in the real world as easily. The reason is, how do I find someone else who's a Dogecoin enthusiast somewhere close to me? So right now I'm in Seoul, actually, in Apgujeong, right? So I have to like walk around here and try to say, well, who likes Dogecoin? Like, how do I find people? I have to find someone who wears a t-shirt of Dogecoin, right? Or I mean, I can go on chain and I can check via Block Explorer or RPC calls, like who owns what, and I can try to get some data. But it's very hard to find other people who also believe in Dogecoin and who might even be willing to spend some money to build certain things related to Dogecoin with me. The internet makes it a lot easier. And the blockchain makes it easier for me to identify these people. And especially a DAO allows us to potentially coordinate ourselves to build things on top of Dogecoin or Dogecoin chains or whatever we want. With shitposting, the example that has become more famous now, that was an example a few months ago, is Remilia Corporation, or also known as the Milady NFTs. So I'm not going to go into details, but it's basically people who just enjoy shitposting together, and they enjoy basically delivering products on top of that. They especially delivered a set of NFTs. Elon Musk recently retweeted one of the Miladies. And so you can kind of build organizations around these behaviors, which you couldn't build before. And the example of simping is just Irene DAO. I'm not going to go into that right now. And so the fourth problem is really like native crypto problems. The most famous one is progressive decentralization, which is if you are building a product or a company today that tries to build some kind of crypto-related product, whether that be a layer one, whether you're trying to build, a two-sided marketplace on chain like Brain Trust, whether you try to build a pricing protocol for NFTs, how do you make sure that you don't end up in jail, even though you're trying to do everything right? the dominant answer, according to the progressive decentralization playbook, is that you have your private company, you raise some money, you hire a bunch of developers and marketing people and business people, you launch an MVP, you get some users, but because you're not sure how the government's going to treat you, you're going to create a second entity, which is a nonprofit foundation, typically in the Cayman Islands, although there's 3-4 jurisdictions that people go to. And that foundation will manage an on-chain DAO. And why do you do that? The reason why is that you want to say that whatever product you're making is really not under your control. It is under the control of the users of that product. And the way that you prove that is by basically deploying a bunch of on-chain contracts that users can modify. They can basically make certain proposals is the main way that you can modify these contracts in some way or the other, right? So it's not you who's changing the product or who's deciding what happens to the product. It's the users themselves, right? So you can notice that the dominant crypto problem, especially via progressive decentralization, is really a way of trying to not get sued and not go to prison, which is an interesting way of looking at DAOs, right? So let's wrap this back up. I'm not trying to define DAOs in a technical way, a series of contracts. I'm not trying to tell you what problems cause DAOs to be needed. And these are 4 problems that cause DAOs to be needed. There may be more, there may be less. I'm currently trying to work out the details of them, but that is one way of looking at when you might need a DAO versus when you might not need a DAO. And we can talk a bit more about that. Oh, so what are DAOs? So I just explained you the causes for why one needs a DAO, but not what a DAO is, right? And so here's like 4. When I interviewed a whole bunch of people in the DAO space, these 4 things came up multiple times. So a DAO is mainly a new legal structure. This actually is true. So you have the Marshall Islands, and you have Vermont in the US, which is a state, and you have Wyoming in the US, who have explicitly passed laws that recognize DAOs as a type of organization. So just as you have, a B Corp or you have an LLC, you can have something that is a DAO. It's like legally recognized as a DAO. And so obviously lawmakers think that DAOs are primarily a legal structure that affords you with certain advantages and disadvantages. Then there's a second set of people in crypto that think that DAOs are primarily some type of organizational design. What I mean with that is the following. People will tell you that if a DAO isn't structured in a completely flat way, in a way that isn't completely democratic, right? In a way that isn't just anyone can make decisions at any point in time and anyone can vote at any point in time. If it's not structured like that, then it's not a DAO. In other words, if a DAO has a hierarchy, let's imagine a DAO that has a CEO that has, most of the powers, and underneath that you have a classic management team, and underneath that you have middle managers and working teams, then some people believe that that is not a DAO. I think that's an interesting point of view. I'm not going to say anything about that right now, but we'll talk about it later. And then the third types of people, which are the most common people most recently, think that DAOs are just something that has to do with governance. Meaning, Compound made this famous, but it's the idea that if I issue a product, certain parameters of that product, values of the parameters of that product can be changed by users or other kinds of people, token holders more generally, right? But people often say that token holders are users, which is not fully true. But the idea is that DAOs are just governance. Put differently, if there is no governance in a DAO, then it's not a DAO. Right? So it's a different way of thinking again. And the fourth types of people are what I call the hyper-digitalization people, which is a camp of people who say that DAOs are perhaps the only way to natively organize on the internet. What is meant with that is that no nation state can come in and try to shut down your organization by virtue of saying that, the Rolf DAO is based in Seoul, or the Rolf DAO is based in Paris, or the Rolf DAO is based in Los Angeles. Nation states cannot do that. And as a result, but they can do that with any other organization today, including Facebook, including Google, right? And including your traditional furniture company that has nothing to do with the internet. And so DAOs are really these organizations where we will live in the future when a lot of our activity is going to be online. And it is these organizations that will structure what we do in these online worlds. So I'm obviously of the camp number 4, right? I think that what makes DAOs unique is that they have, and here comes the definition, that DAOs are organizations who have in a core piece of their infrastructure on a blockchain. In other words, something is not a Coca-Cola, if they create a DAO, which is just deploy a bunch of smart contracts on chain, whichever chain, but these smart contracts don't define the identity or the core infrastructure of Coca-Cola, then Coca-Cola is not a DAO. Then Coca-Cola is just doing a little experiment with some technology and software, right? So for something to be a DAO, if it has a set of smart contracts, some stuff that's on chain, then that stuff that's on chain must be essential. It must be core to the organization itself. In other words, it must be blockchain native. It must be on-chain native. It must be internet native. If it is not a DAO to me. I should say that this is very controversial, in my opinion, which is on purpose, right? But we can talk more about this. So really quickly, I'll take you through some DAO history. So there was the first period was sort of shortly after the Ethereum ICO. I call it the skeuomorphic area. A skeuomorphic means that you take something that's familiar, and when you see something new, you try to understand it on the terms of what you understand before, on terms of what's familiar. And so a lot of the discussions around 2015 and 16, when I was talking to people, it was extremely fragmented, right? And everyone was like, oh, the million things that we can do, like Ready Player One worlds, and we can build entire corporations that are like managed by AI, managed by AI, we don't need people anymore. There was AI doomerism, and a lot of the discussion was happening mainly because we didn't have anything else to do on chain. So Augur back then in late 2015 was like, I think it was the first ICO, if I remember correctly. And I mean, that was it, right? There was like one thing per year, right? So that wasn't a lot to talk about. So there was a lot of like imagination around possibilities. The second period that came was then in 2016, mainly with the DAO, right? Which was this idea of let's all contribute a bunch of money to these smart contracts, and then these smart contracts represent an organization, just like a VC, that can invest into other organizations. And then, of course, the thing didn't work because there was someone hacked it and drained a bunch of ETH. And then the whole community was faced with this big decision. Do we allow this and just continue with it because, it's code. So, whatever is on chain is kind of like a game. If you understand software better than me, and if you can call certain functions better than me, then you're just a better programmer than me, right? And then that's fine. And so that's when the whole debate came from code is law, right? And I'll say something where I have a very strong opinion about whether the code is law era, but also the code in law is law principle makes sense or not. And this is actually an idea that isn't mine, but that came from a guy called Lorenz, who's a professor in law at Harvard. And he explained it extremely well. And he said, look, the internet, including blockchains, are kind of like a house. So if you come to my house, I have certain rules in my house. For example, in many homes in Korea, you have to take off your shoes before you walk entirely into the home, right? Now, if you go into a home in France, there are many homes you don't have to take off your shoes. And so what I'm trying to say is that my home may have different rules than your home. That doesn't mean, however, that each of our homes is embedded in a bigger context, which has its own rules. For example, if I say that if you come to my home, I am allowed to hit you, right? And you may disagree with that. I say, but you come to my home, you come inside my home, and then this is my rule. If you come to my home, I can hit you 3 times on the head, really hard, right? And you say, no, that is not allowed in Korea. You cannot just hit people, right? I'm like, but you came to my home. So the example I'm trying to give you is that the code is law argument of many people in crypto is the idea that we have built our own home and we have our own rules. We encode a lot of these rules in some very fancy and very immutable ways, and no one else can intervene into our rules in our home. But that is just not true. Meaning, if you hack a smart contract of a DAO, or if the person who hacked the DAO still falls within a larger context where that is considered stealing, right? He may not have thought of it as stealing. Some people may not think of it as stealing, but blockchains, and especially a lot of the software experiments that we make, are embedded within these greater contexts where certain behaviors are defined very clearly as being legal versus illegal. And so this code is law era, in my opinion, was a very early and very naive era where it was a lot of people who liked tech, who liked code. They were imagining about what could be done with code, but they were thinking about it in a way as if they were rulers of the universe, which is just not true, right? Our homes are part of neighborhoods, our neighborhoods are part of cities, and cities are part of nation states. The next era that came, I call it the Rube Goldberg era, is basically monolithic platforms. So there was MakerDAO, Digix DAO, Aragon, DXDAO. The only ones that have survived are MakerDAO and Aragon. And it's basically, just very complicated smart contracts trying to do a lot of things in a lot of detail. And everything is basically waterfall kind of architecture or like processes, right? The reason why that was done like that is because it was the ICO era. So the real reason why you built DAOs was to raise a lot of money to do something that you didn't know anything about. And there were no users, you had no idea about who should use this, you had no idea what this was for, but there was a lot of money to be made. And so you just said, I'm going to do everything in a single platform. Then came what I call the minimum viable DAO era, MVD. This era was a response to the two eras before. So in 2016, there was the DAO, right, which was, again, a very complex set of smart contracts. You then had the Rube Goldberg era, where you had not a single complicated DAO, but you had a single very complicated platform for DAOs, like Aragon. And all these things didn't really work. And so some of the people who had helped code the DAO itself said, why don't we create smart contracts that are super, super simple and just try to do the essential functions that we need to have in DAOs? And so what emerged was this idea of slaying Moloch, which is a very famous term in crypto. Moloch is the god of coordination failure. There's a whole poem about that, where we think that DAOs are great to slay Moloch, meaning to help people coordinate who wouldn't otherwise be able to coordinate about a certain issue. Moloch DAO was the first one, was kind of a grant-making DAO. So people went there, contributed some money, and then you could fund different initiatives on Ethereum. Out of that, MetaCartel DAO was born. And MetaCartel DAO was also a grants DAO. Interestingly, when MetaCartel DAO started, people were trying mainly to solve the problem of doing gasless transactions. So if my mom goes and uses Ethereum, even today, she mostly has to go and figure out how to buy ETH in order to make a single transaction. Mom hasn't figured that out until today, and she probably won't, right? So how can I just pay for her transactions, right? And so we basically drafted up a thing that ended up working, but it hasn't become the dominant model. And then after the community kind of finished building that solution, they decided, well, we really like each other, and we really like the idea that we want to build minimum viable DAOs. And so let's create this second entity called MetaCartel Ventures DAO. And the second entity was meant to, if MetaCartel DAO was a grant-making DAO giving $10,000, MetaCartel Ventures DAO was a DAO giving anything from $50,000 up to a few $1 million to a single company. Typically companies that were doing really crazy things on Ethereum, at least back then. And so I think we were actually one of the first ones to give a grant to what later on became Yearn DAO, Yearn, right? We also helped, Stani was part of it, and Aave became really big. It wasn't big before. It was Aave. It was this other thing called Lend. In any case, so MetaCartel has funded a lot of different ventures, including Known Origin, which I helped lead, which sold to eBay, which is just an NFT platform. And so minimum viable DAOs, this era was about, let's not focus on the possibilities of code, but let's try to make the code as simple as possible to allow a bunch of people who are spread all across the world. And literally the members of MetaCartel Ventures DAO, which are about 70, there's people in Bolivia, there's people in Colombia, there's people in Mexico, there's people in North America, there's people in Europe, there's people in Africa, there's people in New Zealand, there's people in Korea, right? There's people pretty much all spread across the world. And it would have been very, very hard for us to coordinate into a single investment vehicle that is not on chain. Versus the way we coded the contract there was you would send an ETH and then the contract would mint a bunch of tokens in return. And let's say if we all contributed 100 ETH and if Rolf sent 5 ETH, he would get 5 shares in return. But if you sent 1 ETH, you would get 1 share in return. And then each of these shares would also allow you to vote. And what's so great about MetaCartel Ventures DAO being built on the Moloch framework for DAOs is that if I want to leave from MetaCartel Ventures DAO, all I need to do is to call the contract. And the contract will give me my share of all the assets controlled by that contract. That is not possible today. If you give some money to a venture capital fund today on Wednesday, May 24th, and you want to get out in the next 50 minutes, they will not give you your money, right? That is not how it works, right? The earliest at best is probably going to be in 3 months. Most likely it's in a year. And sometimes they just say, once you give me money, you have to wait 5 to 10 years. So that was a really cool thing that we could do with these smart contracts that we can't do in the real world. You can send you money and you can almost get it back immediately. Okay. DAOs as a governance area, which is the dominant era today, right? What's interesting about this era, so I have examples here, but I want to highlight what I think is interesting about DAOs as governance. What DAOs as governance have done is that they have made us think that DAOs cannot exist without tokens. Why? Because tokens are the way that we govern. Right? Only if a DAO has tokens and distributes these tokens to different addresses, then each of these addresses can govern. Now, there's lots of problems with that, right? There's Sybil attacks. How do you know one token, one vote? Or do you do, what if there's whales initially, people that own a lot of the tokens at the beginning, they can basically outvote almost everybody else. This can be the founding team, or sometimes it's VCs, such as in the case of Uniswap. So there's a lot of problems with this token-based governance. But what I want to point out is not that token-based governance is problematic. It's that the way we think about DAOs today is that DAOs must have tokens because we think that the main purpose of DAOs is to govern. And the way to govern is to use tokens. So that's also just an interesting idea, but it's not a necessary idea. And I'll return to that later. So I guess I list a bunch of DAO types here. You guys can go through this later. What I want to highlight is that it's been about maybe 6 to 9 months that what I've noticed in the DAO space is that a lot of people are asking, why do we need DAOs? When are DAOs useful? When are they not useful? And so my preferred way to organize DAOs is by way of problems that exist that require DAOs as a solution. But most people think of DAOs in terms of DAO types. So there's protocol DAOs, right? There's fashion DAOs, there's investment DAOs, there's DAOs for cities, right? There's like guilds, there's social DAOs, there's all these different types of DAOs. That basically ends up being a very, very long list of different types of DAOs. And no one will agree because you can take 2 types and you can merge them into one, right? You can have a superset, you can have subsets. People will argue about, well, should the elements in the set actually all be in that set, or should some element be taken out and be a new set? So a lot of people talk about DAOs in terms of DAO types. I personally think that's not very productive. The reason why is that we want to think of DAOs in a way that is simple. So what I laid out before in terms of 4 problems that DAOs solve, it's something that I can apply to almost any DAO that comes my way, and I can slot the DAO into that set, one of these 4 sets. Versus, many DAOs exhibit characteristics of multiple DAO types. So for example, with MetaCartel Ventures, there's both a legal entity as well as an on-chain set of smart contracts. The reason why we have the legal entity is for liability protection. And second of all, because when the DAO, the on-chain set of smart contracts, wanted to invest in a startup, the startup came back and said, okay, so what do we write on our cap table? Meaning there's a list of there's a document that says who the shareholders are for any kind of company, and you have to write who is on that, who are the different shareholders, and that what you write has to be identifiable by the state. Meaning you can't just write A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then be like, everyone's happy. That typically has an ID. So if you have a business, you have a business ID. If you're an individual, you have a passport ID, right? And so if you just have a set of smart contracts, what's your ID? Well, you don't have an ID. You're just a number, a set of smart contracts. You can't just write, well, go look at a block explorer, right? And so we had to create this legal entity. And so in some ways, MetaCartel Ventures DAO was both a traditional organizations, but it was also kind of like an investment DAO at the top. At the same time, we also gave out grants. So we were also a grant DAO, not just an investment DAO. So you can see how DAO types are kind of this very vague and very a DAO can be one thing, it can be multiple things. It becomes very messy very quickly, especially as this is a very short list. What you will find is you will find a lot of articles online that define DAOs by a lot of different types. And the list can basically keeps growing every day. But this is definitely one way that people define DAOs. Okay, so where are we going? What are some of the trends in the DAO space? So the main thing is that we're moving from monolithic structures to modular structures. And so you have different startups who are trying to build out small primitives. That's the big trend. You will remember that I talked about Aragon as building a huge monolithic structure that tried to do everything from voting to different types of voting, to being kind of a communications platform, to doing accounting, et cetera, et cetera. Today, if you start at the top left, you see safes, right? Safes are literally just smart wallets, which everyone thinks is a multi-sig wallet, but it's bigger than a multi-sig. And so that's what they really do well. Today, you have Snapshot, right, which is run by a French guy, actually, sitting out in Thailand. And all it does, it just allows you to do a very specific type of voting, right? In terms of communication platforms, the ones that we have gotten to is things like Discord and Telegram, which are kind of Web2. But you have a lot of startups whose basic pitch is, I'm building the Discord version for Web3. I'm building the Telegram for Web3. There's a lot. Every week I get at least 10 different pitch decks of those. And it hasn't stopped for years. I don't know why. Anyways. We even have, when you have an organization, one of the things you need is roles, right? So let me give you an example. At MetaCartel Ventures DAO, we have a Twitter account. So the question is, who has access to the username and the password for the Twitter account? And how do you control if the person who has access to the Twitter account leaves MetaCartel Ventures DAO, right? How do you get that back and how do you reallocate it? And so this is so there's a thing called HATS protocol, which is a set of smart contracts that allows a DAO to control access on-chain to certain credentials or certain information, including Twitter username and Twitter passwords. And so you have all these basically small primitives that are being built more recently, and everyone's kind of trying to work on these very small primitives. It's interesting to me because while in 2018, Aragon kind of started out trying to build a huge monolithic structure, the trend has been to break things down from complex to more simple. That was Moloch. And then not just from simple, but break it down into even smaller primitives. So things are just like DeFi Legos, you'll have DAO Legos. And so the trend has been that people are building smaller and smaller functionalities for organizations over time. And the problem with that is the following. Let me make a concrete example. If MetaCartel Ventures DAO makes an investment into a startup and it sends ETH from its treasury contract to another on-chain address controlled by the startup, several things are needed, which is what I write here in the bottom right. There are legal implications of that single transactions, right? Like what just happened? What money went from what organization to another one? Second, there are accounting implications. So if we use a safe in order to store our treasury assets from which we invest into startups, so we hold a bunch of ETH, right? But because when people contributed ETH, I think ETH was at 200 or something. And then when we invest, ETH is at like 2,000 now. When we send that ETH over, let's say we invest 1 ETH into the startup. So we invest $2,000. When we send that over in that single transaction, we have an unrealized gain of $1,800, right? Because people contributed at $200. We send it out when it's worth $2,000. So we made money on just holding the ETH. We made $1,800. So and now we invest $1,800 into the company. So in return, we get some shares from the startup company. But what we didn't realize at the beginning, is that we have to pay taxes on the realized gain of 1,800. So initially, no one cared. Everyone was like, oh, let's just send ETH to the contract, and then the contract can like invest in different startups, and like that's it. But that's not that simple, right? The other one is, so this is an accounting implication. It gets much more complex, but I hope that is sort of an accounting implication. The other one is that single transaction doesn't just have legal implications and accounting implications, it has auditing implications. What I mean is the following. Every year we get an audit done to make sure that everyone knows what's happening with the money, right? Because not everyone is tracking what's happening with every single transaction from the DAO. And so we need to hire a third party that then comes in and looks at all the transactions the DAO has made. Now that sounds great in theory, but in practice, there are very few people in the world who can understand transactions on chain, especially transactions that 70 people who are like basically OGs in crypto are making. Like we do a lot of crazy stuff, right? And we try a lot of crazy things, right? And so now you have a transaction executed via a safe that's like hooked up to some kind of minion, to another smart contract that has like special properties and calls like another smart contract. And like an auditor who was trained, in the normal world, somewhere at KPMG, has no idea what the hell is happening. And so why do I put that in here? Remember, Aragon started with a big monolithic platform. We then from complex to simple. And now we're building out these smaller primitives or modules, right? But as we're building out these modules, people are building them independently. They are not considering other modules that need to be built. So the legal module is being built independently of the accounting module, which is being built independently of the auditing module, which is built independently of the voting module. And while all these modules are individually cool, and they're kind of like, it kind of feels like Python playground here, it's not really how it works. You need to consider a single transaction often touches on several modules. And so what I think the next trend will be is that people will understand that it's not just about coding functions, but it's about understanding the context around functions. In other words, building primitives is great, but we must understand context. So this leads me to the next point, which is, okay, so we're building a bunch of modules and libraries, but what are we really building for? And so Lorenz Lessig, who wrote a book, and in that book he talked about the pathetic dot theory, and he basically said that people are influenced by 4 forces. He said they're influenced by the market, right? What people are willing to kind of supply and demand. They're influenced by the law, they're influenced by norms and architecture. I want to focus on architecture here. The thing that was really interesting in his book is that he said that in a digital age, the code that we write or the code that we build has values embedded in it. So rather than, it kind of goes back to the example of, if you come to my home and can I just hit you 3 times on the head? or 20 times, or can I not? It means certain rules, i.e. functions, right, or if-then statements, have values embedded in them. And he says that in a virtual world, we have an opportunity to refashion the values that constrain and enable our behaviors in ways that we cannot in the offline world. And so coming back to the idea of what are we building for DAOs, we're building primitives, and each of these primitives shouldn't just be if-then statements. We should think of them as something that enables and constrains values that we believe in, right? And so I just wanted to highlight that really quick. Here's some more trends. There's governance problems. There's a lot of them these days, from ENS, Merit Circle, Tribe DAO. Aragon has had some really big problems recently. There's governance attacks, flash loans to buy votes, Oracle attacks, coin voting. I mean, I'm going to go through them. I think they're pretty obvious. Let me go into kind of what DAOs need, because I think that's an important point. So the main point here is it's not about decentralization. So it's not about the D of DAOs. It's not about the A. It's not about autonomy, but it's about the O. It's organizations. Meaning it's about building collectives that can reliably and legitimately produce goods and services. What I mean with this is the following. One of the great things about, Kakao is that if I was to go work for Kakao and then I leave Kakao, Kakao will still be able to reliably and legitimately operate Kakao Talk. Like the chat app is not reliant on Rolf coming and going, right? And in fact, you could argue that Kakao, the organization, does not rely on any one individual, which is pretty amazing. That's what makes the organization like a separate thing from any one individual or the sum of specific individuals. And so the organization can deliver these amazing products. There's organizations to build cars. Like no one individual knows how to build a car. There's organizations that can build rockets. We can go to space. Like I have no idea how to do it, but I would love to sit in a rocket, right? So what can we build on the internet that isn't just decentralized? That's a talk about for blockchains and consensus and networks. I think it's interesting, but that's not about organizations, right? Autonomy is this idea of like, oh, you have like self-executing contracts. But is that really all that we're talking about? Or are we talking about what these contracts can do that we could not do as individual human beings? And that to me is the organization. Another way I like to put this is the following. DAOs are, what is the noun in DAOs? It's organization, decentralized autonomous organization. If the noun was decentralization, we should call it organized autonomous decentralization. It should be OAT. And that sounds weird, right? If it was about autonomy, it should be organized decentralized autonomy. But that's not what it is. It's decentralized autonomous organization. So we should think about organization more than we should think about autonomy and decentralization when we talk about DAOs. Again, this is a controversial opinion, but I wanted to share it. So here's some things that are needed in the DAO space, right? Very complicated GUIs. We need better ones. Second, modular primitives that are aware of each other, right? So you build something for voting, just make sure you know what that means legally, what that means for accounting, what that means for auditing. We need best practices, a lot from the open source community, which ironically we don't have. Supercharging existing, not just novel use cases, various primitives emphasizing specifically the capability of smart contracts. The example that I gave you was, if I contribute money to an investment DAO, I can take it out at any point in time, 24/7, which I cannot if I contribute money to a venture capital fund. Number 6 is crypto native assets that are valuable, but not necessarily priced. Really quick, I think university DAOs would be amazing. So let me give you an example. If I was a graduate of KAIST and you guys came to me and said, oh, Rolf, can I have 1 hour to talk to you about whether I should go into crypto? And I'm like, okay, but I'm like super busy. But I'm happy to give you an hour because you're an alumni from KAIST and I talk to you guys. Then how does anyone know that I delivered value to you? Nobody. What if you gave me a token? Let's call it the KAIST token. So I received the KAIST token. And now everyone who tracks the KAIST token transactions can see that there was a value exchange that happened. And so I start to amass a bunch of KAIST tokens. Now, what do I do with them? Well, I go to KAIST, the university, and I say, I want to take Jason's class because I think Jason's class is amazing. here's a bunch of KAIST tokens. And then, Jason gets a bunch of KAIST tokens. What can he do with that? Well, he can give it out to the students that take his class, especially the ones that actually engage or interact or that learn something. And then these students, in turn, can go to other alumni, and then the cycle can continue. Here you have a DAO, which is basically the KAIST DAO, that does not require the KAIST token to be worth $5 or $10. It doesn't matter. The price doesn't matter. What matters is that value that is hidden becomes revealed because you tokenize it, because you put it on chain. And the reason why you want to put a DAO around it is because you want to decide, what can this token be exchanged for? Can it be exchanged for, Jason's class or not? Can it be exchanged for empty classroom seats? And how much? What should the supply be? Maybe you want to change it at some point in time because there's more and more students, more and more alumni, right? In any case, I mean, not talk too much about that, but I think it's super fascinating. And then, delivering legitimate, compliant, and reliable products and services. We need more DAOs like that, obviously. All right, that's really it. I talked a lot longer than I expected, but if you have any questions, fire away.
Wow, great insight. In the last part, you mean that we have to hide the benefit for some governance tokens or DAO. Is it right?
Not the benefits. We don't need to have a price associated to a token. So often we think that the way DAOs work, right, is when they think about token distribution, it's mixed with the way when I distribute the token, I collect money. That's typically the way that, and then token governance is based on whoever basically paid money. Or if you want to start governing in Uniswap or Balancer, you have to buy the token, right? It's very difficult for you to get it otherwise. You can try to get a grant and stuff, but it's the minority of cases. So what I'm trying to say is, what if we had DAOs that govern excess assets, meaning empty classroom seats? Like for you to have another person join in this classroom, do they really have to pay? Is it really a huge cost to you if there's another person on the Zoom call? Probably not. But the value to them might be very large because they learn a lot from all the different people who come on these calls, right? And so they might just send you a token and they can decide how much. Or you can say, no, if you want to come into Rolf's class, then you need to send me 5 tokens. And if you want to go to, I don't know, David's class, you need to send 10 tokens or whatever. So my point is, there doesn't need to be a price associated with a token for a DAO to function.
Yeah, I think it is good. And I hope many people in crypto don't relate some utility to the price of a token.
Yeah.
But it's very ideal.
It is.
Totally ideal. We have to live in physical world. So when I ask some token to other people, I think about the price and the value of token, and you need to pay for my service with 5 tokens or 10 tokens. So it is equal to $1 or $10. So it's very good. I think I totally agree, but I'm not sure it's possible in real world.
Yeah, working on it actually with a couple of universities. Princeton has expressed interest in trying this out, so I'm trying to work on an MVP with them, but no one's tried it yet, so it may not work.
Interesting. And there were some questions in chat box. Can you check?
Yeah, what are some of the drawbacks of DAOs in your opinion? So the first drawback is there's no clear legal framework. So if you engage in something that is not clearly defined, that's risky, right?
Risky, very risky.
Paying a lot of money, you can end up in jail, right? You can end up dealing with lawyers a lot more than you may want to. So those are some of the biggest drawbacks of DAOs today, I think. There's another question around, do you think legislation on the nation state level is essential for DAOs to thrive? The short answer is no, but I think it would be extremely helpful. The reason why is the following. There is a small group in crypto that is specifically trying to build DAOs in special economic zones. I think Busan has a special economic zone, right?
Songdo, yeah,
Songdo
yeah,
has
right.
one. And so different nations already have these special economic zones that kind of have like special laws and stuff, right? So you can, a lot of people are trying to build DAOs in these places, which I think will help DAOs thrive, but it will limit the size to which they can thrive. If nation states establish laws for DAOs, then I think that's far, far better for DAOs to thrive to a much, much bigger scale than they could otherwise. And then Minsuk, I think you raised your hand.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Rolf, for a really nice talk. I have a really quick question, but before I ask you this question, I want to share this short story of mine that I really recently experienced. So, you mentioned that DAO is here for solving, meeting too many lawyers, to solve too many legal issues. But I experienced quite the opposite. Recently, as a university, KAIST, we actually got the grant from a blockchain company, Clayton, basically. And we were so excited, and then we're supposed to receive, a couple of millions of dollars per year as a grant. You mentioned grant DAO, and right, and the problem was that university as a traditional organization was not able to write a contract with DAO. The university, they just say that, there must be one entity there in our paper contract, but that is not possible in the DAO structure, as you know quite well. So it was a huge frustrations, and I had to talk to many different lawyers, and it was a nightmare. So do you know anyone who's trying to solve that problem? I mean, basically, it's an interface or interaction between DAO and a traditional organization. I guess you can see many such problems in many different places. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the more recent trend, although it's probably not a very mainstream, people don't know about it yet, but it will be more public, I think, in a year, is that DAOs. You can break them down in 3 phases. DAOs, just smart contracts. So very difficult to interface with offline organizations. Second phase is DAOs are tethered to an offline entity, which is typically a nonprofit foundation, typically in the Cayman or Panama, BVI, or Switzerland, right? And so you create this off-chain entity, and that entity kind of has a lot of rights over these contracts. And the third thing, which is this new trend, is that you end up creating many different entities that have very specific purposes. So rather than a single foundation that kind of manages everything, you end up having like a legal entity that does investment into the ecosystem. So it'd be like Clayton Venture Capital Fund, right? Which could be partly governed by token holders. You would have one that does like product development. You'd have one that just does like grants, right? And so yeah, I guess that's the short answer. Did that answer the question?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, then I guess you already answered my question that I'm gonna ask, but there will be some legal, risks associated with those creating companies for the specific reasons. But I think that's the risk that someone has to take to solve this problem for the time being, I guess.
Yeah, and just the one thing I'll say is that as long as you do things in good faith, I don't think it's a big problem. I mean, it's still a problem. You wish you didn't have the problem of having to explain what you're trying to do is good. But there are many ways to try to do the right thing. It's just a lot of work that no one really wants to do. Cody asked, oh no, wait.
So in terms of Professor Kang's questions, I'd like to add one more example. In many cases of investment DAO, they need a legal framework, legal entity to invest in startups. So some investment DAOs create SPC, special purpose corporation, for each startup. each investment. So they create SPC and then put money into SPC, and then this SPC invest in a specific startup. So that DAO creates a lot of SPCs to invest in each startup. So yeah, so it is one way to make legal entity for DAO.
Yep, that's right. In fact, there's a friend of mine, one of the earliest DAOists, called Eric Arsenault, who's building a platform called Venture Club, which is exactly that. So he's actually going to ecosystem funds and is saying, well, some of these ecosystem funds are investing in startups that build on their ecosystem. So, you know, I don't know, on Near, you know, the Near ecosystem fund invests only on startups building on Near. And the problem is, who's getting the returns if the startup becomes successful? It's that fund, but like, you really want the token holders to really get a share of it. And so one way of doing that is you go to this platform, Venture Club, and the ecosystem fund negotiates a deal with the startup. The ecosystem fund invests, but builds a special SPV or SPC where any token holders can put money in and basically co-invest. But yeah, I don't, we can talk more if you want about that. Cody asks, would you recommend students to work with DAOs than traditional organizations as a first-time job? If so, why? I guess it really depends what DAO and what the traditional job is, right? So opportunity cost. I think working for DAOs, I think you should do it for two reasons. Number one, you don't have to do it full time. So that's a big benefit. Number two, there is nothing better than to actually do something in order to really understand it. That's very similar, I mean, you guys, to programming, right? Like I can read a book about programming or I can program. Like if I program, I will understand programming far better than if I just go read it, right? And so those are the two main reasons. Then in terms of money, DAOs can pay extremely, extremely well. So I don't, unless you're an absolute superstar and you'll make $1 million a year, a DAO can very easily pay you six figures, $100,000 minimum or more, depending on what exactly you do. Yeah, so I guess that'd be my answer to that question.
Okay. Is there any other question? I have one question. I think we need some legal entity or legal framework to create a DAO safely and running DAO safely. So there are some cases like Wyoming DAO LLC, but the problem is there is a missing point. Who should take responsibility in a bad situation? So I think current DAO registration don't define who should take responsibility. So how can we define the single person or single entity to take a responsibility in DAO? It is not DAO.
Great question. Yeah, so so we talked about this about 4 weeks ago. I went to this law and DAOs at Harvard. It was in April, actually 6 weeks ago, and that question came up. And so there's no clear answer yet. The general idea is that you must designate some entity as being responsible, and that entity must be able to satisfy potential punishments imposed upon it, right? And so it becomes tricky, but like if you don't define a single person as being responsible, then the whole organization as such can be responsible with the assets that it holds, right? So that's one way of answering the question, but it's not great. Another way of answering the question is to say, you can limit what DAOs can do in the first place. That way you limit the liabilities that they may incur. also not a perfect question, because whatever you do, you might do it wrong, or you might do it in a weird way, right? I might take a spoon and still hit you, right? It's still a misuse of the spoon, right? So the other way that's been happening is that there's this group called DAOstar, which is a DAO made of a lot of other DAO members who are trying to define standards for DAOs. So I think we recently released a standard for DAOs to have a unique identification number. So it's almost like a business identification number, but now you have that also for DAOs. So that's useful if you want to, query or index a list of DAOs, but it's also useful for legal purposes so that you can identify a DAO, as well as we're developing standards for who are the members of a DAO. And all of these are kind of precursors to saying who may be liable in case something goes wrong. But these are great questions and, still unsolved, unfortunately. And I will say, if you don't have a legal entity and you just do a set of smart contracts, you may run into problems like OOKI, which was a case, OOKI, OOKI, which was a DAO that was created to manage a protocol called BZRX, crypto, which was basically like borrowing, lending, and trading. And there was a hack, and the question is who was responsible. And the US states said that all members who had voted in the DAO were responsible to cover.
I heard that.
Which is pretty bad. So, I mean, I don't know how you're going to find them all, but still, it's bad. So you should have some kind of legal entity today, as opposed to just a smart contract, just for protection. I see one more question. Would legislation restrict the freedom of DAOs, especially if DAO tokens become shares? Yeah, I think so. So let me be clear. A token, right, especially ERC20, which I guess you've learned what that is, it's just 6 functions. It's just a standard, right? It's a programmatic standard for a smart contract, right? So a token can be a security, can be shares, but it could also be loyalty points. So I can own shares in Korean Air, but I can also own Korean airline miles, right? These can both be tokenized on a blockchain as ERC20s, right? But there are different things. So if all DAOs and all DAO tokens become just categorized as shares, that definitely is restrictive. But I don't think all DAO tokens have to be shares. Some of them can be just like airline miles, right? In this university example that I gave you, if I help out a KAIST alumni by over a 1-hour call, like that's not, and you give me tokens for that, it's not like giving me shares in anything, right? It's just like a reward, right? And so, yes, I think if some DAO tokens are defined as shares, that will restrict what you can and cannot do, which I think is good, because there's a lot of scams in Korea, but a lot of great companies too, but there's a lot of scams, and that will restrict the number of scams. But I think we shouldn't just have legislation for DAO tokens as shares. We should also have legislation that recognizes that certain DAO tokens can be other things. And so in summary, I think we just need to have some legislation that says it's either A, B, or C, as opposed to we won't tell you whatever it is, and we'll just sue you whenever we want to, which is like what the US is currently doing.
One last question. I emphasize Rombai doing in this class. So please give students an advice on DAO. Should we participate in should we participate in DAO, or should we create a DAO, or should we wait for some time for DAO?
That's a great question. So if I was you, this is one of those things, I would not participate in voting in a DAO unless you really know what you're doing. So long and short, don't vote. Number 2, you can deploy DAOs. I think you should definitely do that. So if you want to deploy Moloch DAOs, you should use DAOhouse.club. And Aragon recently released a new set of contracts as well. That's okay. Aragon. So I would use those 2 platforms and just go and deploy some DAOs. and then you can play around with it. If you want, you can look into the contracts. It's not super user friendly, but I hope we all programmers here. So, but those two will give you a better sense. So you can create and deploy smart contracts. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as you don't write in there that it's for like bad purposes, right? Just say you're doing a book club or something or whatever. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your great lectures and great experience and advice and insight. Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. See you in offline.
Definitely.
In Seoul or other place in the world.
We will. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Okay. Bye.